Hello, and thank you for listening. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I have a small request. If you're enjoying the Book and Lounge podcast, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps us to continue to bring you engaging discussions on your favorite books. Now, let's get started. 18-year-old Apollo and his parents go on an extended trip to Jamaica, where his father has some business to conclude. Not long after their arrival, they encounter Dinah, who is convinced that Apollo is the son she gave away to an American couple 18 years ago. And so begins a tale of love, greed, poverty, class, identity, and belonging. Set in Lazarus Gardens, a ghetto in Kingston, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You by Sharma Taylor brings together a cast of characters and explores the complexities of motherhood and the lessons we learn or sometimes don't learn from it. I am joined by Annette, Katrina, and Taiwo as we dissect the themes, the characters, and narratives that make this book so compelling. We'll share our insights, our favourite moments, and what, if anything, we learned. So, grab your headphones, settle in, and let's dive into the conversation. So, thank you all very much for joining. And yeah, we'll go. So, we're talking about What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You.
It's interesting how you stumble over the title because you generally speak correct English.
Exactly, yes. And then you're like, that doesn't sound right. Yeah. Anyway, let's not start with that. So let's just go generally around saying generally what we thought of the book. And we'll come back to some of the issues that have been raised. So who wants to go first?
I really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm thinking about characters and the voice that the author gives to different characters. And I feel that the point of view and the voice that she gave for many of the characters, they seem very authentic and I found them believable, and I was very much interested in seeing how the character would develop over time. Even the naivety of, what's his name? Is it Apollo? Or yeah, I found it interesting. The growth, the change, the fact that he's a young man, stroke boy, and how impressionable he is, but how he's kind of navigating this uncharted territory, how he's trying to find his tribe and all the consequences of that. So I felt that she really has a lot to say in an interesting way, the author.
Yes, I enjoyed it. I liked all the different voices. To me, it was like giving you a picture of Jamaica at that time from lots of different angles by doing all those different voices. And the story as well, I think, there's the two aspects, aren't there? There's the one about all the sort of corruption and the way things are working in the area for the people there, but also the story about how is this young man somebody else's son or not. That, I felt it kept me going. Yes, I liked it.
Okay. And Annette?
I didn't love it that much. It's a running theme with me at the moment. Yeah, but I didn't love it. I like the time in which it was set. I don't know too much about Jamaica's history. Although we did read that book, was it Powell? Like a couple of years ago. That was quite interesting. But yeah, I enjoyed kind of learning more about Jamaica's history, and I enjoyed the time that it was set. And it was interesting to, see how things were working, especially with corruption and the MPs and the police and everything, and how they kind of all worked together, how everything linked up. But for me, I just felt there were too many voices. I didn't really appreciate that. I didn't think it was necessary. There were a lot of characters that I didn't need to hear from, personally, especially some that I think one of them only had like one chapter. I can't remember his name. He only had one chapter. So why did we need to have that chapter? I think it was far too long. She had a lot to say, but I don't think everything was completely relevant. And I did find the characters quite frustrating. Following the book club, I understand I need to show understanding to people if they're younger and so on. So I understand that his age and etc. And he lived quite a sheltered life, so I understand his naivety in parts. But the main part of the story, we never really got an answer. I guess you don't have to, but it was such a long story and so much had happened. I thought there'll be a bit of a resolution on that one part at the end, and there wasn't. So yeah, historically I liked it. Everything else, not really.
Okay. And I absolutely agree with Annette. I think there were way too many characters and the story was told from way too many points of view. I liked the plot. I like the fact that it was set in that time, in Jamaica at that time. And I also like the whole political atmosphere and everything that was going on in relation to politics. I like the descriptiveness of it. I mean, I felt that I was actually in Jamaica as I was reading this. The characters were way too many. So I think that for me was the only thing that I didn't like about it. But overall, I think it was a really good book. It gives you a very good history of Jamaica. And with regards to the story and whether or not it was resolved in the end, I feel that in the end, that was not really that important. It's how Ty was saying, how the character had grown and had developed. It was then irrelevant really whether or not, we find out who the mother is. So at least, I wasn't as disappointed with the ending in that respect.
I must disagree with the two of you in the most strong and diplomatic terms possible. I really must disagree. This point of too many narrative voices, too many characters, too many points of view. For me, generally speaking, okay, apart from Seven Killings to a
Brief History of Seven Killings.
Yeah, A Brief History of Seven Killings, where I did get lost because the characters there were many. This only had, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so different characters.
You had more than that, more than that.
Well, it could have been more than 2 dozen.
Okay, 24 is enough.
Well, okay, 24 is a lot. But the thing is that, okay, fine, 24 is a lot. If there are up to 24 characters, it's a lot. But I do enjoy having multiple, so you've got the main people and then you've got the auxiliary people who are fleshed out. I do enjoy that. And I don't get it enough, which is why I think I enjoyed it a lot.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with having multiple characters and the story being told from multiple points of view. I just feel that in this instance, there were characters that did not need the story to be told from their points of view.
I feel like I can sympathise with both points of view because there probably are a bit too many or a few that you don't really need. But I enjoyed hearing all the different points of view. I felt like it's a sort of 360 of Jamaica, that you got all these different characters who had quite different backgrounds speaking up, even though like Strego, I couldn't tell you anything much about him now and what he said. But at the time when you're reading it, it didn't bother me at all.
All I would say is that me, a Jack's Hill neighbour, that's all I would say.
A Jack's Hill neighbour, I mean, really?
That was funny.
And I know a lot of you didn't like that particular character, even though he had, 2 chapters? And he wasn't really saying much, but for me, I loved him.
What did you learn from the Jack's Hill
neighbour? He didn't have his own chapter at that point. The dog. I
loved the humour. The thing is that chapters were like chapterettes. They were like mini chapters. Where sometimes an author has maybe 2 pages and it's a chapter. So it's not really a chapter. It's just like a chapter.
But Taiwo, sorry, Katrina, carry on.
Well, I was going to say, because the whole story is told by a voice and a voice and a voice and a voice, it's sort of like, how is it going to be explained what happened after the burglary? And it just sort of like, in a humorous way, fleshes out that little bit that you could do without it, but it's kind of slightly amusing. Yeah, I didn't worry.
I think it adds to the richness of the whole story, the whole narrative. Yes, I accept you could do without some of these characters, but it doesn't weaken anything. It doesn't detract. To me, it makes it more rich because they're believable characters and the voices are individual voices. They're not, she's not kind of recycling the voice of one character into another character. No, you're not with me. I pushed you too far.
I'm not sure I agree there. Because
okay.
What is the difference between Strego and Damien, for example? I mean, Their lives are exactly the same. They're both from Lazarus Gardens. Their experiences are very similar. So by knowing Damien, I already feel that I know the kind of life Strago had and his background and all of that. So I didn't really need to hear from Strago, for example.
Yeah, but Strago is a bad man, and Damien is bordering
As British
on being
is a bad man. British is a bad man. So
but British is a bad man who's experienced expatriate life at Her Majesty's pleasure. So
yeah,
he's a top bad man.
But I don't need to know. I don't need to know to know that Strago has had a bad life. Okay, British's experience can easily tell me that what kind of experience Strago has had. The fact that British has also made it to the UK doesn't make a difference because he's growing up from the same background. And in any case, Damien grew up in the same background. Yes, one of them was a decentish guy because Damien wasn't exactly the most innocent of characters. Yeah, so
yes.
They've grown up in the same environment. So I didn't need to know Strago's point of view or hear from his point of view to know the kind of life. At least is how I feel, to know the kind of life that he led.
I
the fact that
agree.
they've led similar lives doesn't mean that they're going to react to the same environment in the same way. Each is an individual. Each is unique.
But then you might as well interview everyone at Lazarus Gardens in that case. That's what it. That's what
it's the colourful characters. It's the interesting people that make the narrative sing and hum.
Yeah. Was Strago interesting?
No, okay, he wasn't. Fine, he wasn't.
Didn't British's son, the one with the leg or something?
Yeah.
Didn't he also have a chapter at one point? A quick. Why?
Yeah, but that was part of the whole daddy issues thing, wasn't it? He's trying to prove himself to his father. He's trying to be the worthy heir to the empire. You didn't care. You were not emotionally engaged or involved.
No, I wasn't. It's everyone's stories at some point will just become a bit too similar. I like Strago and Damien, I just didn't see, and British, I didn't see any really that much difference. They all brought up in a relatively similar way, so they didn't all need Strago, and especially just didn't need his own chapter. I actually have identified 6 characters, and that would have been it. Would have been enough for me. No one else needed to come in. I think Dinah, Apollo's mum, Regina.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying Damien, not really. I don't want to, but Damien.
Celeste.
Oh yeah, this Apollo's mum, Celeste. She's in the 5, and then I can choose between either British or one of the policemen. 6,
what about Sims?
That's it.
Sims.
What about Sims?
Sims and British and the policemen.
They can feed into one chapter. British can mention the Sims, or Sims can mention, and then we can just get it from that. They don't. That's how. And then there's all you need is 6, and I think that would have been sufficient, really. And everyone else's names could be dropped in. That's what I would have done. But yeah.
I mean, I think I agree with Annette, but I think it's gonna be like 2 versus 2 when it comes to these characters things. I think we'll move on to the language. So the book is written in. There's a lot of it, and I initially really struggled. Oh, who's that? What's that?
My neighbour.
What's your neighbour doing?
I have no idea.
Okay. Anyhow, I was just saying, initially when I started reading it, I struggled somewhat. I mean, I shouldn't really have been surprised given the title that there would be a lot of patois in it. And initially when I started reading it, it was like, oh, this is really difficult. But as I got in, it actually got easier, and actually started appreciating that it was written in patois, because then their voices became more authentic and it kind of placed you in the environment, especially when you were reading about the Lazarus Gardens residents. So I really appreciated that about it. What did you guys think of the patois?
I had no problem with it, to be honest. I mean, right from the get-go, because I record that you did say that you it took you a little while to get into the swing of things, but I didn't experience that at all. I've just finished reading a different book, which is in patois, and that was difficult to get into, and it wasn't in Jamaican, it was in Trinidad and Tobago. So maybe because I'm not particularly overly familiar, but it's something that is quite common, isn't it? The Jamaican patois. So I didn't struggle at all.
Mm-hmm. I just found that because normally when I read, I don't really, hear the words. I'm looking at it visually. But because you're not used to seeing patois written down, I needed to sort of speak it in my head. And then as I got into it. So just initially when I was sort of like, oh, I'm not quite sure about that. But when I sort of read it more, what it would sound like, it was all quite clear. I think it was okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think, Taiwo, you mentioned, and Nat, you mentioned the setting and the historical part of it. So through Sims and British, and also through ACPT Davies, I guess, we find out a little bit about politics and the history of Jamaica at the time. And did you know much about that period in Jamaica? And you feel that you learned anything new?
I only knew what I'd learned as a result of that Marlon James, A Brief History of Seven Killings. Because of that, I had to kind of Google to try and work out what had been going on politically in Jamaica at the time it was set. And as a result of that, I learned a little bit. So on the back of that, I had a little bit of an understanding of what was going on, but I'm not all that much a political creature. So politics doesn't interest me to a great extent.
Oh, how can it not?
No.
Okay. How about the I guess then the historic part of it, the fact that the US has been heavily involved in the Caribbean and how they've manipulated governments across the globe, and how actually wasn't sure whether Ray was a CIA agent or wasn't.
Well, I don't know much about Jamaican politics, and I haven't yet read the history of Seven Killings, which I've got to read, I suppose, eventually. But the whole business of what America's doing in the Caribbean is just so much par for the course that there was nothing very surprising in picking that up as you went along, because it's just what America tends to do, and it's not really different, is it? It hasn't changed too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was interesting, but I don't know. You sort of learn it's just another part of the world where America's been interfering. If you hadn't stopped to think about that before, that's all, you know.
And was any of you surprised that Celeste didn't somehow know any of this?
Not really. I've said before, haven't I? I think people like to close their eyes to what's going on around them. They, you know,
Are you saying willful ignorance?
Yes, I think people know that there's a lot going on that isn't, you know, it is difficult, and they feel there's nothing they can do about it anyway. So they might just well get on with their life and ignore it. I feel like I meet many people like that all the time. So I'm not surprised by Celeste.
No, I can't. I wasn't surprised with her ignorance, but it wasn't for the same reasons as you. I think it's more the fact that the US sort of holds itself out to be the good guys all the time. They're kind of like the people that go out into the world spreading democracy, sending hope and all these good things. So Americans tend to think that, you know, all of these things that's happening in the world, they're there to resolve them and to teach people basically how to behave and how to be democratic. And so they never really teach in the US their own history and the damage and all the other things that they've done to disestablish governments across the world.
I agree with you. I think you're right. And especially when we think back, it's the 80s. That's even more likely to be the case, whereas probably I'm thinking of it from the point of view of times now, and we're a bit more cynical on the whole.
Yeah,
I think people might suspect, but they just don't really want to know. America might be different. I don't know. Still different.
Taiwo, you wanted to say something?
But when you say they don't teach their history, I mean, they do teach their history, but it's a version of their history, isn't it? Just like any other nation in the global north. They teach a particular slant on their own history, a whitewashed version, a neo-colonial version, a version where, you know, in America, it's all about the Pilgrim, founding fathers, and all the rest of it. And so the things that other people, those particularly from the global majority, might say you need to take into account as well. These are things that tend to be overlooked or brushed under the carpet, not emphasized at all. I mean, America tends to hold itself up as the exemplar and the world's policeman, but because they don't examine themselves and probably never will examine themselves, they therefore are able to go out and say, well, this is how it's done. This is do as we say, don't do as we do, basically.
Yeah, and I don't think the thing is unique to America, as you said earlier on. Countries just tend to be very selective about what they teach in their history. I mean, it's happening even now, especially in America, where you have all these issues where they're banning books, and also they're removing books from libraries. And then, yesterday I was reading something about the riots in France and why there are riots in France and why it's the North African youth that are rioting. And, there are a lot of people that don't understand the history or don't know the history of France in different parts of North Africa and West Africa. And so they didn't really understand the background. So, and I think the problem is basically endemic across the whole of the West. It's not just America, unfortunately. But I think it was very well done in the book in that she managed to weave that in, so you could actually see why the Jamaican government was, or why things were how they were in Lazarus Gardens. Taiwo, I think last time you mentioned that you kind of understood Sims and you empathized with him. Now I've still been thinking about that, and I really cannot understand how you can empathize with him.
He's still my favourite character.
Okay.
Sims is still my favourite character. And as Katrina was saying about the whole thing of politics and corruption and how one hand always washes the other hand. You've got the whole judiciary, you've got the politicians, you've got the police, criminal justice system, all kind of accommodating each other in various ways. There's not a lot of black and white. It's mainly all different shades of grey, but they all have to work together for the system, which is well oiled, to keep on ticking over. But I could understand things, it made me think about Nigeria. It made me think about many other African and global South nations where it's not, it's too simplistic to say, as one of our previous prime ministers said, these are terribly corrupt nations. It's too simplistic to say these are corrupt nations. You need to understand why part of the reason the system doesn't allow for a kind of honesty, because, it's like you're trying to work against the system, but the system will always overpower the individual. The system
but in that instance, Taiwo, do you not? I mean, if you have, I guess, your values and your morals, do you then not say, actually, I'm not going to dirty myself, I'm not going to soil myself, I'm going to step away and try and improve things and do things in a way that still allows me to keep my values?
I guess you could do that on an individual basis, but if you're seeking power where it enables you to make certain changes on a more broad scale, hopefully, because power enables you to do things rather than maybe just say things, you can actually get some things done, like Sims. If Sims didn't compromise his principles, assuming he'd come into politics with clean hands and a clean heart, assuming he did, I don't know, maybe he never did, but assuming he did, and then he found the system so skewed, so corrupted that there's no way he can meet everyone's expectations or even halfway meet everyone's expectations on his MP salary. He can't get the things that need to get done and stay in power. So he's going to have to make a choice. It's either he compromises himself in order to retain power and then says, well, the ends justify the means. As long as I can get the things done that need to get done for the vast majority of people, then however I get it done, whatever kickbacks it requires for me to receive in order to have the funds to get these things done, and obviously part of the kickbacks goes to him as well, then so be it. Or you say, no, I'm going to keep my hands clean. I probably will never get into power in the first place, but my hands are clean. And you continue to kind of shout into the void, about all this corruption and all the rest, but nothing ever changes.
But this is it. So this is what I was thinking. If everybody went into it thinking the way you've described, as in, well, when I get in there, at some point, my hands are going to have to get dirty. I'm going to have to take kickback in here and there. If everybody goes into it thinking that way, that's why things don't change. Because if people went in with the motivation of getting things changed and keeping their values, surely that's how we change things, because you keep your integrity.
But don't you think it's that so often people get overwhelmed by the whole situation of that you might come in with the intention, but all the different levers are so interconnected that it's so very difficult to get out of it. Because it's like, if you think about, say, me as an individual, what am I supposed to do about my pension? Do I just say, oh, it's probably been invested in Shell and things like that, so I'm not going to take it? Everybody becomes enmeshed in the whole process to some extent.
But do you not?
I don't mean you shouldn't try, but it's not surprising when people give way under it all in the end.
I get you, and I guess there's some things that you just don't have control over, right? But there's some things where, I mean, in this instance, for example, I mean, where you have Sims, he's involved. He knows about the corruption. He knows about the drugs and all of that, and he's heavily involved in it. So that's completely different level compared to the other things that you don't have control over.
That's true, because, I mean, some people obviously do go into politics because they're going to be able to cream off for themselves. So it's difficult, isn't it?
But look at Sims and British, though. I mean, they almost had a symbiotic relationship, but you knew it was never going to last indefinitely. And you knew that when it ends, it's probably going to end badly for one of them. Probably going to end in a violent way for one of them. I mean, Sims was thinking he can control British. British is seeking power in the same way that Sims is seeking power. British has a function to play. So even though, you've got this Sims as part of, you could call him the formal economy, the desirable face of Kingston and all the rest of it, Jamaica, you've got British kind of part of the underground, part of the informal economy. But both the formal and the informal economy are still an economy, and each has to, like the yin and the yang, isn't it? They have to complement each other for the whole economic system to continue to work. So British was performing a particular function that Sims would have struggled to perform himself and may not have been able to perform it himself. But whatever the case, there's always a price to pay.
But that happens in an instance where I'm thinking that happens in a situation where the state is failing and the government itself is not doing its duties in relation.
Why is the state failing, though?
Because of the meddling from the US.
That's part of it. The whole economic system and the global economic system is not going to favour the island of Jamaica and various other West Indian islands, is it? I mean, this is why they group together, don't they? I mean, for example, with the whole banana thing, they kind of group together to try and sell their bananas to the EU as a bloc, as a nation, as a collective almost, to try and get the best deals, trade deals and good prices for their produce and all the rest of it. Because there tends to be that strength in unity. They come together as a whole group, as a trading bloc. But still, you're disadvantaged, because remember when we read the whole Professor Kehinde Andrews thing, when he's talking about the global institutions, the World Trade Body, the IMF and all the rest. I used to think they were neutral, that they were there for every nation's economy. But he's saying, well, they're not. They're there to maintain the status quo.
Maintain the status quo, yes.
And the status quo is in favour of the global north. So it's to maintain the status quo.
So then...
so you're disadvantaged, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. You're disadvantaged right from the get-go. So even before Sims enters power, whatever he wants to do, he has to come in on the back foot. He's disadvantaged whatever he does. He's always going to be the junior partner because he's a Jamaican to the big brother of America. So
basically what you're saying is that as a politician in one of these countries, it's irrelevant what your views are. It's irrelevant what your values are. If you go into politics, you're compromised from the get-go and basically deal with it.
That would kind of sound as if to say there is no hope. Just because you know that you may well fail doesn't mean that you shouldn't try a particular thing that you're trying to achieve, If you're coming in and you're trying to do Thomas Sankara or whatever it is, you
get taken out.
Yeah, but you have to accept that you may get taken out. Either you lose your position, you lose your life, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to make the world a better place.
And so that brings me back to my initial statement about Sims and why I don't have any empathy for him. I think he's just part of the the corrupt system, and really, I just think he's a bad guy, and he's just there to get power and maintain power, and then maintain the kind of life. So this is why I do not sympathize or empathize with him at all.
Maybe I should say, maybe a better way of looking at it for me with Sims is that I have an understanding of what made him into how he has become. Because you know how it is with power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, doesn't it? So when there are no checks and balances, you may find that you compromise yourself a little bit in order to achieve the common good. But that little bit of compromise, where does it begin and where does it end? And before you know it, you're fully compromised. Before you know it, you're part and parcel of the problem that you came in to solve.
And coming back to then the other characters. So we know why, I guess, Sims is doing what he's doing. So what of the other characters, which ones, if any, do you empathize? Do you have any empathy for?
That's what I found interesting, was that I enjoyed reading all of them, but you didn't, maybe it is because there are so many voices that you never really started to identify particularly with or sympathize a great deal with any of them. Yeah, I couldn't say there was one character that I thought better of than the others, really. They're all disappointing to a certain extent.
I guess the better question then is, do you understand the motivations of some of the characters? So if I start off with someone like British, do you understand why he's the way he is?
Well, British is, I mean, from the way he's described, he is a sort of psychopathic individual, isn't he? That is a little bit, that's where I disagree with Annette saying if you know one person's upbringing, you know all of it, because he's a bit unusual, you know, even within anybody's sort of, what do you call it, sector of society, to be that oblivious to other people's feelings is a bit unusual.
I did keep forgetting that he set animals on fire. Fine, I shouldn't use him as an example. I keep forgetting that. But with everyone else,
he's a psychopath, wasn't he? British,
yeah,
psychopath.
But he was interesting, wasn't he? Because although he is a psychopath, which sort of helped him in his profession, if you like, in other ways he did sort of show the progression of what happens when you're brought up in that situation. I thought he was quite an interesting character. I enjoyed reading him, but you don't sort of, I don't think you can understand his motivation unless you are yourself a bit of a psychopath. Yeah. But the others, like Damien, yes, I mean, you feel really sorry for them, don't you? We talked before a bit about the loss of parents and the abandonment issues that run through. Yes, I felt sorry for him.
What about Regina?
You had.
And Regina as well. They're just kids who started off badly, really, not through their own fault, through the fault of the adults around them, and then they're just making the best of what they can, really.
So Damien's mother basically gets up and goes to make a better life and says she's going to send for him. What is it that happened to Regina's mother again?
She had to Did she?
I think she died, didn't she?
She died.
I thought she'd run off with a guy.
Maybe.
I thought Regina had just reached an age where she felt that Regina should stand on her own 2 feet. I think she was like 13 or something like that. So she just felt, out you go.
No, because Regina was with an auntie who took her in when, I don't know what happened to her mother. Mother disappeared.
Her mother went off with another guy.
Maybe. I can't remember. Maybe. It's the auntie who said, well, I've done enough for you now. It's time you...
Oh, it's the auntie that pushed her out the nest.
Yeah. So
both Regina and Damien, in some ways, it's like their childhood was kind of cut short, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Annette.
Just saying, I think Damien did have a few opportunities which he chose not to take. Guy, I can't remember his name, the guy that Regina's, did he not offer him an apprenticeship? He said no. Like
Mr. Mackenzie.
Mr. Mackenzie offered him, but he could have been a mechanic. He didn't want to do it.
Yeah, but he's a musician. He's a creative.
You can be creative. Go and do the job, and then you get the
Got
money
a
to go and
day
do
job
studio time.
first.
You want to go and do burglary. No, he had that opportunity. I'm sure Dinah also tried to encourage him to stay in school. He seemed like he was a relatively good student. Like with Regina, I think she's been through a lot. But I do think with Damien, he just kept choosing the wrong. He had a few opportunities and he just didn't take them up, because everyone's like, oh, he's a sweet guy, and I can tell that he's probably good natured. Then just do the right thing, and he didn't. So I'm not saying I don't pity him a bit, but it is not as if no one tried to give him a helping hand. He just didn't want to take it.
And that is just like a typical African, very straight and narrow. You're supposed to. But you don't seem to understand that Damon is a delicate, creative type. You want him to get oil under his fingernails when he should be strumming a guitar, and you want him to be breaking a nail, changing a tire, and
Go and get your degree, then you can get your oil.
You can do whatever music. And then when you finish with your trade, go and do the creative things you want to do. But what are you doing all day? You're not doing anything all day. So that's why I struggled a bit with him. I was just thinking, you literally could be working, and
But I think some of that is I guess not having a role model. Because if you think about it, most of the time he was by himself. Yes, Dinah did try as much as she could, but Dinah was working most of the time. So I think part of that was not having a role model and not having someone really to guide him properly.
Could have been Mr. Mackenzie.
That's true. Yeah.
And also, I think there was an element of trauma with Damien.
Yeah.
Unresolved childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm. So how about Dinah then? Did you have any sympathies for her? Or do you understand her motivations?
Dinah just seemed to be about poverty.
Sorry?
I felt with Dinah, kind of like she just seemed to be married to poverty. It just seemed to be no way for her to ever kind of get a leg up to make something of her life. There always seemed to be things calling upon her that were kind of pulling her back.
But also, did she herself not suffer from abandonment? Because her father, she never knew who her father was, and she was just brought up by her mum. Yeah. No, she didn't. She I think her mum showed her a picture when she was young, and said when she asked who her father was, and he just said he was just some guy. So she never really did know who her father was.
Wasn't it her mother that got raped by the grocery man?
Yeah, the sewing guy, the tailor.
Oh yes, yeah. So there is a lot of, I guess.
Trauma.
Yeah, and also missing fathers in the story. So going back to the other side then, so we've kind of spoken about the residents of Lazarus Gardens. How about the residents of, is it Jack Hill?
Jack's Hill.
So we have Celeste and Ray, and then the Browns. Do you understand their motivations? Did you have any empathy for them?
I had very little empathy for these uptown people.
Why?
Because they're wealthy. They should know better.
They're not explained so well, are they? You get this impression they're wealthy people living a nice life, but you don't really know so much about what they're thinking, what their views are. Because after all, it must be if your son suddenly starts running off to keep visiting a woman who's suddenly claimed to be his mother, which may or may not be true, but probably isn't, I think. You think there'd be quite a lot going on in their heads about what he's up to and so on, but I don't feel that's really discussed very much.
I think that came through a lot with Celeste.
Did they know, though? Did they know that's where he was going? Because
yes, because she went off there and had a fight with him.
But that's only eventually. He'd been going there for a while before they kind of discovered that.
But I think she did know. I think, and I'm pretty sure he told her. So I feel that even towards the end, I feel that there was a lot of description about Celeste and her being a mother and what she was feeling about Apollo going to see Dinah. Unless you disagree.
Only happened after the fight, not really beforehand. I just felt like, how are you letting this boy go off this whole time and nothing has come up? It's only after the fight we got a bit more of how she felt, but that was still quite a chunk of time in which he'd already been going there. I don't know. I just feel like I would have locked. Like, if you're not that happy, I would literally have locked him in his room. I don't feel like this gave him a lot of freedom, even though they were saying, "Oh, you can't go here, you can't go there," but he was gone the whole day, every day. So I don't know. I agree, Katrina. It was a bit odd. Like,
it's not a toddler that you can lock him in his room.
No, but if you don't like what he's doing, especially the fact that you know that that's where he's going and you feel really strongly about it, you still allowed him to keep going.
Yeah, you can't lock him in his room, but his father was sort of more, he's a lad, perhaps guessing that he's got a girlfriend. That seemed to be the general impression. He's got a girlfriend, you've got to give him a bit of... But if you were the mother, you might accept that, but you'd still be worrying. Yeah. Oh my God, what's he getting himself into? I thought it was because to keep the mystery about his actual mother, that they didn't say so much about Celeste, and also, or on the other hand, that she was a little bit of... I found her a bit cold, really.
She was, yeah.
And that would explain why he needed this other mother figure that he was running off to.
Yeah. And she is very jealous because she feels that Dinah can give Apollo what she cannot seem to be able to give Apollo. And that's part of the reason as to why she goes there to fight, or at least to confront Dinah. But I don't know. I still disagree that as a character she's not developed, because we do know about her background. We do know about where she grew up. We do know that she taught in some universities in Africa. We do know about her alleged first husband, John. and
Black guy.
That if you say Ray, I don't feel we know very much about Ray, and I agree with you. I think with Ray, maybe she just wants to maintain that mystery, whether or not is he a secret agent or is he not. So I feel that with Ray, we don't get to know very much about him. But I think there's a lot about Celeste that we do know about her.
We know her backstory, don't we? We know her backstory in order to...
Is that you, Taiwo? Okay, well, you can go and answer the phone. We'll wait for you. So anyway, you're saying we have a backstory.
We know her backstory in order to understand what kind of a black woman she is, whether she really relates to her blackness. And also the fact that she's kind of she's transitioned from having a husband who was black, who wasn't really welcomed by her family because he's black and he's dark, to a white guy who also wasn't entirely acceptable to the family because he's white.
Yeah.
But, they want her to tread a particular path, which for various reasons she refuses to tread. So understanding her background, understanding particularly the social kind of class that she comes from, then you get an insight into what makes her tick.
Mm-hmm. So then, coming to the son Apollo, he has a lot of identity issues. And what do you think are the reasons for these identity issues? Mums, did you say?
His mum a little bit, I think, for sure. She's
not
kind
just a little bit.
It's okay, a lot. I think Tyra, as he said, how she has an idea of what black people, some certain black people are like, and how they should be. Like, she's not actually that much different from her family in a way. She may not want to accept that, but I don't think she's that much different from her parents at all. And I think she's just, because they've coddled him so much in an environment in which he was brought up in, and she's not. Like, I don't know. I think because she hasn't got that much contact with her family already, and I don't think she's taught around Africa, but I don't think she's even taught him anything. I'm not surprised. I definitely think she has a large part to do with it, because she doesn't really embrace her own blackness, whatever that might mean. It's not going to trickle down to him either.
But also there's the upbringing, the kind of schools that they send him to, the kind of friends that they expect him to have, and the kind of, I guess, careers they're trying to push him into.
And all the trips he went on, he said he's only ever been to like Europe and things where he never really saw black people. So that again, it's not, doesn't help.
Because he seems to be divorced from her family, doesn't he? She's not in contact very much with her family, is she? So because they're rich, presumably a lot of his, he doesn't seem to have black friends of a similar economic standard, which you think he would have if he was involved with his mother's family. And that's where the loss seems to be, which she's a bit short-sighted over.
Yeah, and they do tend to go to network with Ray's side of the family and Ray's friends as well. So he kind of tends to be the token black person, and I guess the what's the word? Oh, look, we've got a black son, or we've got a black member of the family, aren't we doing great? Kind of thing, representative.
So he fills the quota for them.
Oh yes, yeah, and so I guess it is understandable then that he would have all these issues. But do you feel that he fits in Jamaica?
I mean, that's what, in a way, is quite funny, isn't it? Because some of what he's going through is a teenage thing, isn't it? Because we all go through times when we never seem to fit in with anybody. Well, I think a lot of people do. And of course, he finds it's just as difficult because he's a rich boy with the friends that he's adopted. There must have been some people he could have got involved with, I suppose. But because he got to Lazarus Gardens... But anyway, it's all learning, isn't it, for him?
He comes from the US with his parents to Jamaica to feel authentic Jamaican life and to discover authentic Jamaica. But his parents are reluctant to allow him to go to lots of different places that he wants to go to. And then somehow he ends up in Lazarus Gardens, which is not Montego Bay and not what he thought was the Jamaica he wanted to see. And then he falls in love with Regina, and she then takes him to all these beaches where the local people hang out, but at the same, they're still not the kind of places that he wants to go to. But throughout that, I feel that he goes on a journey. So he came to Jamaica expecting, I don't know, to see the kind of things that you see on holiday brochures, right? But actually he's thrown right in the middle of Jamaica, where he's stuck in traffic, where people swear at the police. People don't get out of the way for cars. He then has, his experience with this ghetto community in Lazarus Gardens. I feel that he's been on a journey, and that actually towards the end of the book, he's actually matured.
Compared to how he was, yes.
Yeah, he's now talking about actually sending money to help Damien, who's ended up in prison, and to Regina, who is carrying a child. So I feel that the Apollo we meet at the beginning is not the same Apollo who is on his way out to go back to, and this is within a short period of time.
Yes, because bearing in mind that he's not there for a long period of time, if he were to stay in Jamaica for a couple of years, then maybe he would be better able to integrate in as far as his social class, his economic kind of standing, his education would allow him to integrate with a certain level of Jamaican society, certain kind of people. But the fact that he's able to access Lazarus Gardens through his contacts or through his friendships with Damien, Regina, Dinah, I mean, it's showing him a different kind of Jamaica, not necessarily more or less authentic than the uptown Jamaica, Jack's Hill and all the rest of it, but it's showing him another side of Jamaica. I think if he were actually able to remain in Jamaica for a couple of years at least, and he's able to go downtown, even if he's living uptown, it gives him a much more rounded and broad experience of this is Jamaica, the holiday brochure Jamaica, as well as the poor Jamaica where most of the poor people live and, struggle each day. This is the real Jamaica, all of it wrapped up together.
Yeah.
But he's definitely, like you said, he's definitely matured. I mean, compare him thinking in terms of, I can provide a little bit of cash support. It can make a big difference to Dinah, to Regina, who's having a baby, to Damien. And the whole prison kind of, the way the prison system works in Jamaica, which is just like an African prison system, it's just like, you can get lost there. You can never come out, and, you never really did anything. But once you got into the system and you didn't have someone to get you out, you could just go into that black hole and get lost. Compare that to the kind of thinking of Celeste. Celeste is still kind of very sheltered, is that kind of, I guess, kind of middle-class black person who is of a fair complexion. You don't...
I'm not even sure it's the complexion that would determine that. I think it's money. It's class and money.
Okay,
money.
So the money provides that kind of blanket security.
Yeah, and that's one thing that really came out in the book, the class issue, and then the disparity between the haves and have-nots. I feel that that was a huge running theme in the book.
The class is worthless without the backing up of money. If you haven't got the money to back up the class, what does it do for you?
But how do you get class most of the time?
Breeding.
Well, is it breeding though? In these communities, is it breeding? How do you get to live? Well, I guess it depends on whether we are defining class as, the British class system, or the more, I would say, the more African Caribbean scenario where it's the money that determines where you live. It's not necessarily that your family come from wealth. It's more how much money do you as a person have at that time. That, for me, I think that's in an African setting, or at least in a black setting, that's what determines what class is. Not necessarily that you're from a wealthy. Taiwo, you're looking at me like,
Well, there's that kind of thing, isn't it, of new money and old money.
Okay.
There's that thing where, what was it? One of these MPs was saying something about these people that, have to buy their own furniture. And I was kind of lost on this whole, insult that he was throwing of one of his colleagues. And then someone explained it to me that it's about the whole, you don't inherit. If you inherit furniture, it shows that there's money in your family. Whereas when you have to buy your own furniture.
Well, even poor people inherit furniture.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about IKEA.
The same though.
So I've inherited a few IKEA things.
I'm talking about like family heirlooms, furniture that's been in the family for generations. That it's been passing on and on and on. Your grandfather, even your great grandfather, may have had that same furniture before it then got to you, and you're going to pass it on.
Right. So that's what determines class in, I guess, here, somewhere like here. But I'm not sure that's the same thing. That would be the same in Jamaica. In Jamaica, I think there's a bit of there's an element of color, definitely, where the lighter you are, the more. Well, I mean, the more opportunities you have, so that you are going to have money. You're much more likely to have money than someone who is from of a darker hue, who's not going to have the same opportunities. But I think it's the money that determines which class and then where you're going to live in somewhere like Jamaica, rather than what furniture you inherit.
Also education, isn't it? When you consider, Sims and British sitting down in the private members club for a drink.
Yeah.
The waiter that served them, dark-skinned, and then British thinking people might recognize him, but no one really knows who he is.
Mm-hmm.
They just think maybe he's an associate of Sims for whatever reason. But it's that thing, isn't it? That old money, that, access to certain places, as you said, access to certain opportunities that is not afforded to people of a certain class or people that don't have the money to have access.
But I think also, I guess the whole British thing also shows that in some circumstances you can have as much money as you want. If you then don't have the hairs and the graces, and also the education that is required, they're not going to treat you the same way.
Yes, even though they want to take your money.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really summed up well where Apollo takes Regina to some of the restaurants, some of the uptown restaurants, and her reaction and how she feels that the waiter is looking at her. I think that really sums up the class divide and how people perceive themselves to be seen because of where they come from.
Also, is that kind of viewpoint, isn't it? Because Regina is talking about, why are you exposing me to this good life when I'm not going to be able to live this good life? It's just going to make me maybe make me want to steal because, I've seen the good life and then I'm going to have to go back to my old rotten existence. Whereas his mindset is more, let me show you a good time. Let me take you to somewhere where you wouldn't normally go yourself. Let's have fun. Whereas she's thinking, well, the fun that we're spending this money, the fun that we're having and spending all this money, I could use this money for maybe something else.
This is always the problem, isn't it? Because if you need to have new experiences to develop yourself out of that ghetto life in a way, haven't you? But at the same time, those experiences just look like a waste of money because they could be like, I don't know, school fees or maybe not school fees for her, but that weekend or even one night in the hotel probably pays for a whole term of school fees, if I'm thinking of an African context, but I don't suppose it's entirely dissimilar. It's difficult.
The whole class issue, yeah. So then, what would you say is the one thing that you've learned from the book, or what would you say is your takeaway from the book?
Takeaway from the book?
Yeah.
I'd say my takeaway is that Sharma Taylor is very pretty and has great teeth.
She wasn't in the book. Okay, she was on the back of the cover of the book. Is that it, Taiwo? That's from reading all those pages. That's the only thing you took away from it.
That's what does it for me.
Okay, anyone else?
I mean, that's the thing about it. I don't feel like it is all that memorable. It was enjoyable to read it, and if I went to Jamaica, I think I'd sort of look around me and sort of think, oh, how much does this match up? But I don't think it's a sort of book that leaves you with an awful lot for me. I mean, the issues we've discussed about the corruption, yeah, they're interesting, but you meet them in so many different places that I don't get it particularly from that book.
Okay. And Annette?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Right. So all this time you have not been sitting there thinking, who is the mother?
Well, yeah, but all of you said that's not the main thing. So I'm trying to now get rid of that. So I mean, I was going to say, you've all said, oh, no, that's not the main. I still think it was Dinah. I don't buy most of what Celeste was saying, like everything was lost in a fire, and it just seems too convenient. I'm not convinced. I do think Dinah was the mother overall, but other than that, I didn't really take too much away from it. It was an okay plot, but, and like you said, the corruption is still happening now. It's not anything new. It's interesting to read about, but it's not surprising. So I just learned more about Jamaica's history. That was probably it. I think for me. It was just, I think the amount of characters. I think sometimes I just got a bit lost. How are you even forgetting what happened with Regina's mum, for example? I think that's what happens for me when there's a lot going on. You forget what story was what and who was who. So I think that was the issue for me. Yeah, I do think Dinah's the mum.
I felt the whole unresolved issues. That when we spoke about Damien and even Regina with childhood traumas and how it follows them through their whole life. And they're probably never, they're not going to go into counselling, are they? They're not going to go into some kind of therapy. So they're just going to have to deal with it however they can deal with it and kind of, be the walking wounded and limp along. So in the same way with Dinah and the fact that she, for whatever reason, at the time of her vulnerability, gave away her child. But at the time, she never realized what an impact it would have and reverberate throughout her life down the years, such that we have this whole story of, is it her child? Is it not her child? But the bond, the fractured bond and that void that it created remained with Dinah. And the way in which Apollo seemed to kind of plug into that void that she had, because he himself had some kind of emptiness, didn't he? Because of the way Celeste related to him. So it's like he was quite happy to have two mothers. He never really abandoned Celeste. He still, called her mums or whatever, mumsy or whatever he used to call her. But he was quite happy to accept Dinah as a mother or mother figure, because it's kind of getting the best of two different worlds. You can't have too many good mothers in your life because they're mothering you. Mm-hmm. That was the thing that I got, that whole kind of the bonding, the fact that some bonds go beyond the bond of blood, go beyond the bond of giving birth. You can be a mother even if you haven't given birth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then coming back to the title, What a Mother's Love, well, I'm going to say it correctly, What a Mother's Love Doesn't Teach You. What do you think she meant by that title? Okay, so Celeste professes love for Apollo, as does Dinah. But I think that Apollo learns a lot more from Dinah than does from Celeste. Celeste is able to provide, the material wealth, but the identity, the emotional, I think more of that comes from Dinah.
But even if that's the case, is it more, or is it just something different?
I think it's more something different that he's getting he something he wanted, that he needed, but I don't think he actually believes Diana's his mother. He still believes Celeste is his mum, and he's got his loyalty to her on that basis. Which even at the fight, you saw that, didn't you? That he sort of helps his mum back home, not Dinah. But I thought it was interesting that Dinah, she's wanted and wanted and wanted to know what happened to her son, and they've done all these dances and tried to sort of draw him back, as it were. And eventually she finds somebody who she believes she's drawn back. I don't think he's her biological son, but I don't think it matters, because spiritually they've got this link now. So I think that's quite interesting. When you want something hard enough, you sort of create it for yourself one way or another.
So it's like Dinah is the spiritual or emotional mother, whereas Celeste is the biological in quotes, the material, natural mother, the one that provides at home.
Yeah, and I think like he's very much in a teenage phase, isn't he, where your parents don't do for you what you want them to do. You're looking outwards to different things. And I think he's not probably appreciating what he's got out of them at this point. I mean, materially, he'll know. But his whole attitude to life is really coming from them, although he's developing it in Jamaica. If you think of this whole thing of taking Regina to the experience of a nice hotel, this is his values are coming through from his parents, not. Do you get what I mean? He's just enriching himself in a good way with his experiences in Jamaica, which will round him off, I suppose, more. But I don't think he's getting more from Dinah than from the people he believes are his parents.
It's just something different, isn't it? Because even whatever he's getting emotionally or spiritually, I mean, for example, he followed Dinah to church, didn't he? And she's like, did you get into the spirit? And he's more like, well, it was interesting. He's more like observational than anything else. He's going there to please her. That doesn't mean he has any particular belief. He has no, kind of faith in whatever is going on in the church. It's just, if this will amuse this woman, fine. But he's getting something from her, and she is getting something from him, something that he can't really get from Celeste. But the foundation of his life, the education, the healthcare, the home environment, and all that, the foundation is still what Celeste and her husband have built. That is the Apollo that we meet at the beginning of the book, and that's the Apollo that at the end of the book has kind of built upon that foundation even further. He's becoming a young man.
Just one more question. Mrs. Brown. Is Mrs. Brown white or black?
Who is Mrs. Brown again?
So the friends, Ray and Celeste's friends, the one who Dinah was working for right at the beginning, when Ray and Celeste and Apollo go to their house.
Oh, and she drops the tray and everything. The bored housewife.
I couldn't get it. Is she white or is she black?
In my head, she was very, 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 very light skinned. In my head, she was So she racially ambiguous. Then I'll say maybe that's how I pictured her. I didn't think she was white, but maybe she could pass. There was something. Yeah, that's how I imagined her in my head. To look like.
No, she didn't have any race. She's just one of these ladies at lunch.
She is, yes.
Yeah. I'll just
a trophy wife. A trophy wife.
Well, she was very young for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also just thinking quickly back to the last question about the title of the book. I don't know if that could also be applied to now, like Regina and Damien, especially like, how heartbroken Damien was and still is, like with his mother basically abandoning him. And he acknowledges that Dinah did help bring him up. And I feel like especially Regina as well, they'll both want to do things differently. Obviously, I do feel for her now, but I just thought that they would, if Damien wasn't in jail and if Dinah was healthy, I feel like they would also, they've learned this, I don't know if this is skills or from their experiences growing up, they would want to do things differently. I think they both somewhat matured as well. and would want to do things differently for their child too. They've seen what their mums just didn't provide for them, and also seen what mothering figures have also provided for them. And he's also with Regina, helping to look after Dinah's mum as well. I think she sees that relationship there too. So I do think for both of them that could apply as well.
You see, I unfortunately don't see very much hope for the child, because if you think about it, Dinah's got AIDS, Damien's in prison, Dinah's got dementia, so she's
Dinah
not.
has dementia.
Dinah's mum.
Dinah's
No,
mum.
Dinah has dementia. She's seeing this woman in white.
No, I didn't read it that way.
Got
Yeah, they
stressed.
said it was stress.
At the end, she does say that when Apollo comes back, she's not going to be able to recognize him. And I think this is the mother saying it. She's not going to be able to recognize him because the woman in white who keeps visiting her is going to be there permanently.
Doesn't she
Her
think...
her memory is going.
I thought the woman in white, she was interpreting the woman in white as being sort of heralding her death, not dementia.
No, she's seeing things. She's seeing the woman in white.
Yeah, but
That's how I read it.
I felt like, with the sort of background that Dinah's got, that if she's got sort of issues, they're going to manifest, that her mental mechanisms will create situations like a woman in white, whereas you or I, we might look at something a bit more analytically. But I think when you've been brought up in a different environment where perhaps spirit things are more like considered to be normal, that they exist and they might happen for you, that you will create things like that for yourself to deal with issues. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got dementia.
And I initially read it that way until I read that paragraph where she says actually that when he does return, when Apollo does return, if he returns to Jamaica, because this is describing the bit where she doesn't go to the airport to wave him off, but she walks down Lazarus Street, all right? And she says that if he does return, she's not going to be able to recognize him because the presence of the woman in white is going to be more prevalent. Mm-hmm. And I think what's happened to her mum is slowly beginning to happen to her. And I said, I didn't see it the first time. It was only when I read it again, I'm like, oh, okay.
It could be. I didn't read it that way, but it could be.
I just thought.
I see what you mean, though. I'm just reading the part, page 410.
Do you want to read it out?
Do I want to read it loud?
Yeah.
So they're talking about going, Dinah and Apollo. The last time that they meet. And Apollo says, I'm going to come back to see you. You know that, right? His words hung in the air between them like an intruder. Though he may not be able to keep this promise, in the moment he said it, he meant it with everything in him. Dinah knew she would never see him again. She was happy he would have a better life. Jamaica would hold her boy back. America was a place of wide open spaces where opportunity sprang up from the highways and radiated from tall buildings. Plus, there was the woman in white. She kept Dinah company. The woman lived in the house with Dinah now, and Dinah knew only she could see her. The woman in white had told her what was coming, that if he returned to Jamaica, Dinah wouldn't know who her own son was. So I can see why you're saying that. She's losing it.
So I don't see a great future for any of them, unfortunately. I think on that happy note, I'll take your reviews out of 5.
I'm still giving it a 4, a strong 4. I did enjoy it. I know you guys don't like too many points of view. I loved it. I like the descriptiveness of it, and the point that Katrina made about the politics and the corruption and the understanding of Mr. Sims, MP, and why he was so corrupt. I don't agree with the corruption, but I can understand it. It gave me an insight into it. So I liked that. Yeah, and I liked quite a few of the characters. I still do like Sims as my main character, but definitely a 4, a strong 4 over 5.
Okay, thank you. And Katrina?
Well, I'd say definitely a 3, maybe a 3.5. Because I just enjoyed reading it. I just went through it, read it. They've got different characters, read about them, enjoyed them. I kept going with the mystery around who was his mother. even though by the time you get to the end, it doesn't matter, but it makes you think maybe there's going to be a revelation about that. So that motivates you, but also just everything going on between Sims and British and the police. There's plenty of story there to keep you going, and it's enjoyable. But I can't say that I'll take anything very lasting out of it. It was just something I enjoyed it. It's not depressing like so many even though it's about corruption and all that. It's lighthearted as well. Like, I love the Ghetto Network news thing. Yes. And I enjoyed the character who's passing by walking the dog that he doesn't want to be seen with. They sort of just keep the whole thing light and interesting. And if I ever go to Jamaica, I might try and read it again before I go.
Okay. Annette?
Just 3 stars, I think, for me. There's too many characters that having the amount of characters, I guess, was fine. It's just the too many characters having their own voice was a bit too much for me. I think it made things slightly confusing in terms of trying to remember certain people's backstories and what happened. And also, I don't know if this is because there's too many characters or it could just be the characters themselves. I did struggle to really empathize with anybody. I didn't have strong feelings towards anyone. I didn't have a particularly favorite character. Everyone was just as it was. But it was just a 3 for me because I did enjoy. It was interesting to read about the corruption and the political situation and how everything worked and how everyone was connected to, who, and how the policemen at the police station, Lazarus Gardens, didn't do anything the whole day, just like played dominoes, and they didn't have to do anything. So all of that kind of brought it alive, and the description was very good too. Yeah, that's why it'll just stay 3. Just needed to be half, I think.
Thank you. I am with, I guess, Annette, but I think I'll give it a 3.5 out of 5. And I think the reason for that is that she really kept me engaged. It was a bit of a slow start, but then when I got to a third of the way through, it really picked up, and I really wanted to know what was going on. I really wanted to find out who the mother was. So that tension between the 2 mothers really, kept me engaged. I like the description. I really did feel like I was in Jamaica. I like how everything was just on point in the way she described, as you said, the police station, and then the streets, as Celeste and Ray are driving through for the first time, and Apollo's first experience of Jamaica. I think she's done that really well. So I really like that about it. I like the plot. I like the political and geopolitical issues that she's raised. The only criticism I have, and that you've already said this, is with characterization. Some of the characters were strong. However, there were just way too many points of views, which I didn't appreciate. And yeah, that just kind of spoiled it for me. Yes, I know, Ty, where you disagree and you're shaking your head very strongly, but that's So that's me.
What about the poverty? I felt the way she described poverty in Jamaica, it was like another character.
Yes, and the class divide, the poverty, the class divide, yes, yeah. It was very well done. And you can really see the difference between the haves and how they lived their lives, and then the people that didn't, and how the poverty affected them, and why there was a lot of crime. There was also a lot of violence. That's one thing I noticed, especially from British. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it was very well done. And for a first novel, I think she's done really well. So I'll be looking out for more of her writing. So yeah, thank you guys. Have a great rest of Sunday. And I shall see you, I think, on the 23rd or 24th.
In person, isn't it?
In person, yes.
Okay, cool.
Have a wonderful evening.
Have fun. See you all.
And thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this or any of our other episodes, please subscribe, like and share on Spotify, YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, bye bye.